My husband burned my gala dress and took another woman, calling me an embarrassment. He had no idea the company hosting his promotion party belonged to my family. The dress was still burning when something inside me went completely still. It was not the stillness of shock. It was not the numb silence of a woman sitting in wet grass, trying to make sense of the impossible. It was a different kind of silence, the kind that settles deep in your chest when every feeling you have been managing, forgiving, explaining, and carrying for years finally burns away with the fabric, and what remains underneath is something colder, older, and absolutely without mercy. Smoke rose into the night and vanished into the dark. The last pieces of midnight blue silk curled black and collapsed into ash. I sat on the damp grass with my knees pressed into the dirt and watched it disappear. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not chase after him. I did not do any of the things Gavin had clearly expected me to do while he drove his new car down our driveway toward the life he had decided he deserved without me. I stayed there for about 4 minutes. Then I stood, brushed the grass from my knees, walked back inside, and picked up a phone number I had not dialed in. 7 years. My name is Penelope Summit, not Penelope Carter, which is the name I had been using since I married the man I met in a coffee shop when I was 26, and genuinely, foolishly, beautifully believed he was falling in love with me instead of the version of me he had been allowed to see. Not Penelope, the woman who worked the morning cleaning shift at the Meridian office complex and the dinner rush at Harlow's Diner. Not Penelope, whose hands were rough from industrial detergent, whose shoes were worn through at the heel, and who had eaten peanut butter sandwiches for lunch for longer than she wanted to admit. Penelope Summit, the only heir to Summit Holdings, the 14th largest privately held conglomerate in the country, with interests in commercial real estate, financial services, technology infrastructure, and 3 subsidiary companies operating internationally. Chairwoman of the board, a position I inherited at 23 when my father died and left me everything. A position I had held in absentia for 7 years while a trusted executive committee managed operations, and I carried out what I privately called an experiment in being a person instead of a portfolio. That experiment was over. But I need to tell you how we got there, because the ending only makes sense if you understand the beginning. And the beginning was not a simple story about a villain and a victim. It was a story about a woman who believed in something sincerely, who paid an enormous price for that belief, and who needed far too long to understand exactly what she had been sacrificing herself for. I think you deserve to know the whole shape of it before we arrive at the ballroom. I had already been working double shifts for 3 years when I met Gavin Reeves Carter at a coffee shop on Number 10. It was a Thursday afternoon in October, one of those gray, bitter Chicago days when the wind rolls in off the lake and reminds you that the city has no responsibility to be gentle. I was sitting in the back corner with a cup of tea. I was stretching as long as possible because I had 40 minutes between shifts and nowhere warm to go. Gavin sat at the table next to mine, spread his textbooks out in front of him, ordered an Americano, and asked if I could pass the sugar. That was the entire origin story. A sugar packet on a cold Thursday. At the time, Gavin was finishing his MBA with a concentration in corporate finance, and he had that particular intensity ambitious people from ordinary circumstances sometimes carry. A focused, restless energy, a sense that he had a destination, and very little patience for anything that delayed the route. I found that compelling. I had grown up surrounded by people who reached their destinations by birth, people who moved through the world assuming it had been arranged for their convenience. There was something fascinating to me about someone who was truly trying to build something by effort, someone who was hungry in a way I had not been around enough, so I chose not to tell him who I really was. That needs explaining. Because when people hear it, they usually assume strategy. They assume I was testing him, playing a game, setting a trap, or designing some elaborate experiment. I was not. I was 26. I was tired. And I wanted, more than I had wanted most things in my life, to know whether someone could love me for no reason other than me. Not the Summit name, not the company, not the trust account with 8 figures sitting inside it, not the boardroom, not the inheritance, just Penelope. So I let him meet Penelope. I told him I worked 2 jobs. I told him I was saving money. I kept my real last name locked away in a private document in my apartment, introduced myself as Penelope Marsh, using my mother's maiden name, and stepped out of the life I had built into a smaller, plainer one to see what could grow there. For about 2 years, What grew felt like the answer to the question I had been asking. Gavin was attentive, ambitious, and occasionally funny. He looked at me as though I was the most important person in any room. When he proposed on a Tuesday night in our cramped apartment kitchen with a ring he had saved 4 months to buy, I said yes without hesitation. And I meant it completely. Looking back now, the red flags were there much earlier than I admitted to myself. There was the way he talked about money, not as a tool, but as a score, as proof. There was the way he sorted people into useful and not useful, with a speed he disguised as discernment. There were the small corrections he made to the way I spoke at his university social events, the adjustments to my clothes, the gentle suggestions, and then the less gentle ones, that I present myself differently around his program colleagues. I noticed these things, and then I did what people in love often do with what they notice. I filed them under pressure, progress, ambition. Nobody is perfect, and I know who he is underneath. I know who he is underneath. That turned out to be the cruelest joke of all. For 7 years, I worked to fund his education, support his licensing exams, and absorb the financial weight of 2 people on the income of a woman who smelled like cooking oil, scrubbed bathrooms before sunrise, and brought home whatever leftovers Harlow's allowed the staff to take after closing. I did it because I had made a choice, and I believed in honoring choices. I did it because I kept waiting for the man I thought I had married to look at everything I was carrying and feel something equal to it. But the look I kept waiting for never quite came. What came instead was erosion. Slow, steady erosion, like water eating away at a cliff face. Not dramatic, not all at once, just constant enough that one day you look up and realize the shape of the thing has changed completely. Gavin stopped asking about my shifts. He stopped noticing when I was tired. He began talking about his career trajectory, the way someone talks about a train they alone are riding. Singular, first person. As though the years behind him had no passengers. I kept telling myself it was temporary. Once he had the position, once the pressure of climbing was over, there would be room for us again. Then Summit Holdings announced Gavin Carter's promotion to Vice President of Operations, and instead of room, there was a party. The annual leadership gala at the Harrington Grand Hotel. Black tie, 400 guests, the company's entire upper executive tier. Several members of the city council, 2 state senators, a full press contingent. I had attended that same event before, under my real name, sitting at the head table. Now I was buying a dress on a payment plan and practicing the strange combination of pride and invisibility that being Gavin's wife in a room full of his colleagues required. The dress was midnight blue, knee-length, with delicate beading at the collar that I thought looked elegant without being excessive. It cost me 6 weeks of lunch money. I tried it on 4 times in the fitting room, and each time I felt like someone who was trying hard enough. I had been getting ready for the gala for about an hour when I smelled smoke. It drifted through the back window, thick and chemical, the unmistakable smell of synthetic fabric catching fire. I remember the sequence of reactions with perfect clarity. First confusion, then a specific dread I could not name. Then I was running through the kitchen, toward the back door. Then I saw Gavin in his Italian tuxedo, standing beside our old grill with a bottle of lighter fluid, watching my dress burn. I ran toward it, not because I thought I could save it, it was already gone, but because the body moves toward what it loves before the mind has fully processed the loss. Gavin shoved me backward before I could reach the grill. Not hard enough to injure me, precisely hard enough to make it clear that the decision had been made and my feelings about it did not matter. I landed in the wet grass and looked up at him. "You smell like cooking oil," he said. "Your hands look like a cleaning woman's hands. I am a vice president. I will not walk into that room with someone people will think is the hired help." I said something back. I do not remember the exact words anymore. Something about 7 years of tuition. Something about every night shift. Something about everything I had carried so that he could stand there in that tuxedo with that watch on his wrist. He smiled the way someone smiles when he has already decided the argument is over. "I'm taking Cassandra Pendleton," he said. "Her father is on the board. Try not to be embarrassing about it." Then he got into his car and left. I sat there for 4 minutes. Then I went inside. Then I picked up the phone. Mr. Fairchild answered on the second ring. He always answers on the second ring. He had been my chief executive assistant since I was 23 years old. A meticulous, discreet, entirely unflappable man of 61 who speaks in complete sentences and has not once, in 18 years of service, expressed surprise at anything I have asked of him. That quality is worth more to me than I can quantify. Madam Chairwoman, he said. His voice was warm, steady, and carried no indication at all that it had been 7 years since I had used that title. Good evening, Mr. Fairchild, I said. I need the styling team, the Paris couture, and the diamond collection from the vault. I need 2 security personnel on site within the hour, and a driver to take me to the Harrington by 9:30. Everything will be at your residence within 20 minutes, he said. Shall I alert the board to expect you? Please, I said. And Mr. Fairchild, contact Margaret Holt. Tell her I need a conversation tonight. There was one beat of professional acknowledgement. Of course, Madam Chairwoman. Welcome back. Margaret Holt is Summit Holdings' General Counsel. She has been with the company for 23 years, holds a law degree from Columbia, and has a reputation in corporate legal circles for the kind of precision and patience in financial litigation that makes opposing counsel visibly uncomfortable from 30 feet away. She is 64, silver-haired, completely without vanity, and the most effective attorney I have ever known. When I told her I needed to file for divorce from Gavin Carter, with a full financial disclosure motion and a marital asset review before the end of the business day, she said, I will need 40 minutes and the documentation you referenced. I had documentation. This is the part I want to explain carefully, because it matters. I am not a vindictive person. I did not spend 7 years constructing a trap. I spent 7 years being a wife. Imperfectly, hopefully, and in good faith. And for 2 of those years, quietly and almost against my will, I began noticing things that a person with my background and training could not help noticing once the erosion had gone too far for me to keep explaining it away. Gavin had been taking money, not dramatically, methodically, small diversions from joint accounts, expense reports filed for events we both knew were client-adjacent social engagements rather than actual business costs, a pattern of financial behavior that becomes visible only if you know what to look for and have the access to look. I had both. I had said nothing, not because I was planning revenge, but because I was grieving. Grieving the thing I believed we were building, and the growing evidence that I had built it alone. I had kept records, a folder in a private cloud account, time-stamped and organized, not as a weapon, as a record of reality, which is the only kind of record I know how to keep. I forwarded the folder to Margaret at 8:14 p.m. At 8:15, 3 black vehicles pulled into my driveway. The lead stylist's name was Vivienne Marsh. No relation to my mother's name, just coincidence. She had dressed me for 2 shareholder events, my father's memorial service, and a private state dinner I attended at 24 and have never publicly discussed. She moved through my small rented house with the calm efficiency of someone who had dressed women under far worse circumstances and for far higher stakes. Within 90 minutes, my hair was done. My hands had been treated with something that reversed years of industrial damage faster than I would have believed possible if I had not watched it happen. I stood in front of the narrow mirror in my bedroom, wearing a custom Parisian gown in midnight blue silk. The weight of it was entirely different from the dress that was now ash in my backyard. Around my neck was a diamond necklace that had belonged to my grandmother, a piece I had kept locked in the corporate vault because wearing it in the life I had been living would have been grotesque, impossible to explain, or both. I looked at myself in the mirror. 7 years looked back at me, but not the 7 years Gavin saw. Not the rough hands, the oil smell, the exhaustion, and the worn-down shoes, the other 7 years, the ones underneath, the ones that had been there the whole time, unchanged, simply covered. Hello, I thought. The car arrived at the Harrington Grand at 9:43 p.m. The red carpet was still active. Photographers were working the second half of the arrivals. Society columnists stood in the far press pen. A local news crew was filming B-roll. My security team moved me through the side entrance because I had not come to be photographed outside. I had come to walk through the ballroom doors. Mr. Fairchild met me in the anteroom. He looked at me the way he had always looked at me when I was doing exactly what I was meant to be doing, with the expression of a man whose professional satisfaction depended entirely on things being executed properly. The board is assembled near the east stage, he said. Mr. Pendleton is aware of your presence. He asked me to convey his personal apology for the circumstances of the evening and his complete support for whatever you determine is appropriate. Arthur Pendleton, chairman of the Summit Holdings Board of Directors, was 67 years old, a former federal appellate judge, and the man my father had trusted above everyone else in the company. He had known who I was the entire time Gavin worked at Summit. He had watched Gavin's ascent with the same careful, unspoken reservation I had been watching it with from inside the marriage. He had never interfered because the decision had always been mine to make. His daughter Cassandra was currently standing inside that ballroom on my husband's arm, which created a complication I suspected Mr. Pendleton found deeply inconvenient. "How is Mr. Pendleton feeling about his daughter's present company?" I asked. Mr. Fairchild allowed exactly 1 millimeter of expression to cross his face. He used the phrase, "an unfortunate association, Madam Chairwoman." His words, not mine. "And Margaret?" "Miss Holt is inside." The divorce filing was submitted to the court at 9:18 p.m. The financial disclosure motion is attached. She is prepared to serve Mr. Carter directly this evening. Should you prefer efficiency? "I would," I said. I looked at the ballroom doors. They were 12 feet tall and gilded, the kind of doors designed to make anyone who walks through them feel like an arrival. I had walked through them before, years earlier, under my own name, at an event that felt like ownership. Tonight, it felt like returning. "Open them," I said. The orchestra had been in the middle of a Viennese waltz. I know that because I could hear the last strains of it through the doors in the 3 seconds before they swung open. Then the music stopped. One instrument at a time, the way an orchestra stops when the conductor loses the thread. The room that replaced the music was enormous, glittering, and very quiet, filled with 400 people turning simultaneously toward the light. I walked in slowly. You do not hurry an entrance 7 years in the making. The diamonds caught the chandeliers. The gown moved exactly the way it had been made to move. I kept my eyes forward and my spine straight, and I did not look for Gavin immediately, because I did not need to look for him. I could feel the exact moment his eyes found me. The quality of the room changed. A ripple of social electricity passed through the crowd, the kind that happens when 200 people realize at the same time that something is happening and they do not yet understand what it is. I heard the glass, not the crack of it hitting the floor, because I was too far away for that, but the collective sharp inhale that came just before it. I knew without looking that Gavin had dropped his champagne, because it was the kind of moment that makes people's hands stop working. Then I looked at him. He was standing 30 feet away with Cassandra Pendleton at his side, champagne spreading in a stain across the front of his tuxedo. His face had gone the specific color of a man who has just understood something enormous and irreversible. His mouth was slightly open. His eyes moved between my face, the diamonds, the security team, and Mr. Fairchild at my shoulder. I watched comprehension assemble itself in real time, piece by piece, each one worse than the last. The woman he had left kneeling in the grass, the gown, the diamonds, the board members rising to their feet, Arthur Pendleton turning away from his own daughter. I walked toward the stage. Gavin tried to move toward me. 2 members of my security team stepped into his path without urgency or drama, the way professionals intercept things. Calmly. Finally, without explanation. "Penelope." His voice carried across the silent room. He tried to make it sound reasonable, but it came out like drowning. "Penelope, wait." I took the microphone from the event host, who surrendered it immediately and stepped aside with the instinct of someone who recognizes authority when it passes in front of him. I looked out over 400 people. I saw the board members. I saw the press contingent in the gallery, their recorders already running. I saw Cassandra Pendleton standing completely still with her hand over her mouth. I saw her father, Arthur, in the second row, with his hands clasped behind his back and his eyes facing forward, the posture of a man who had chosen to stand very still and allow events to proceed without him. And I saw Gavin in the center of the ballroom, wearing his expensive tuxedo with champagne on his lapel, surrounded by every powerful person he had spent years positioning himself to impress, finally understanding what the ground beneath him actually was. "Good evening," I said. My voice through the microphone was level. I had given speeches at shareholder meetings, board sessions, and one federal hearing. The steadiness was not exactly composure. It was closer to resolution. When the decision has already been made, when grief has already finished its work, and when only the truth remains waiting to be spoken, your voice does not shake. Most of you know Summit Holdings. Some of you know me, though perhaps not by this name. My name is Penelope Summit. I am the sole heir to this company, and as of tonight, I am resuming my active role as chairwoman of the board. The whispers began immediately. I let them move through the room for a moment. Tonight was intended to celebrate the promotion of Gavin Carter to Vice President of Operations. I want to address that directly. I looked at him. He still had not moved. He looked like a man who had forgotten how. Mr. Carter, your promotion is revoked, effective immediately. Your employment with Summit Holdings is terminated. You are to be escorted from this property tonight, and are barred from all company premises and affiliates in perpetuity. Penelope. His voice came out wrong. Too high, not enough air beneath it. Penelope, please. I didn't know. You are correct that you did not know my name, I said into the microphone. You knew everything else. You knew who you married. You knew who worked 2 jobs so your education could be paid. You knew who had rough hands and smelled like cooking oil. You knew who you called, in your own words, an embarrassment. You knew who you shoved backward in a backyard while a dress burned. You knew all of that. The name is a detail. Margaret Holt moved from the edge of the room toward the center. She is not a woman who makes entrances. She simply arrives, quietly and with great precision, exactly where she is needed. She carried a document envelope in one hand. Mr. Carter, she said. Her voice carried without the microphone. It always does. Margaret Holt, General Counsel, Summit Holdings. You are being served tonight with divorce proceedings filed by Penelope Summit, formerly Penelope Carter. Case number 2, 6DR 4471. Filed at 9:18 p.m. this evening in the Circuit Court. Attached to the filing is a financial disclosure motion documenting a pattern of misappropriation from joint marital accounts totaling $34,700 over a period of 18 months, supported by bank records, expense documentation, and a transaction log. A copy of the supporting documentation has been submitted to the company's internal financial compliance officer as a precautionary measure. She placed the envelope into his hands. He took it automatically, the way people take things when they have stopped having opinions about what their hands are doing. You have 30 days to respond, she said. Then she returned to her position at the edge of the room. The ballroom was quiet enough that I could hear the faint hum of the chandeliers. Gavin looked at the envelope, then at me, then at the crowd, and then back at me. I watched his face move through several stages in rapid succession. Disbelief. Then the instinct to perform outrage. Then the recognition that outrage requires an audience willing to receive it, and the audience in front of him was watching with expressions that contained nothing generous. Then something I had not expected appeared, and it moved me more than I was prepared for. At the end of all of it, he looked simply lost. Not arrogant, not calculating, just lost. A man who had built a life from ambition, manipulation, and the belief that charm was the same thing as substance, now standing in the ruins of it all, with champagne drying on his shirt and a legal document in his hands. I felt something that was not satisfaction and not pity. It was somewhere between them, something without a clean name. The complicated emotion of watching a person finally become exactly what they are after years of watching them pretend to be something better. Then Gavin sat down on the floor. Not dramatically, not in a collapse, just a slow folding, as though his legs made a quiet decision and the rest of him followed. He sat on the ballroom floor in his Italian tuxedo, surrounded by 400 people, and put his face in his hands. Cassandra Pendleton had moved 6 feet away from him by then, with the precise spatial deliberateness of someone creating public distance from an association that had suddenly become impossible to defend. Her father did not look at her. He looked at me from near the stage with an expression that held apology and respect in almost equal measure. My security team helped Gavin to his feet. He did not resist. He walked toward the exit between 2 men in dark suits, with the kind of movement that belongs to people who have run out of plans. The doors of the Harrington Grand opened, then closed behind him, and the sound of them closing was quiet and final. I stood at the microphone for another moment. Summit Holdings will continue to lead with the same values my father built it on: integrity, accountability, and the understanding that every person in this organization is here because of what they contribute, not because of who they know or who they can use. I looked toward the board. I look forward to working with you all properly. Enjoy the rest of the evening. I handed the microphone back to the host. The orchestra began again cautiously, one instrument finding the melody first, the others joining after it. The room rebuilt itself around the music slowly, the way rooms do after something large has passed through them. Mr. Fairchild appeared at my elbow. The press would like a brief statement, if you are willing, Madam Chairwoman. Tomorrow morning, I said. Tonight I would like a glass of water and somewhere quiet to sit for a few minutes. Of course, he said. He led me to a small anteroom off the main hall, and I sat in an upholstered chair, drank a glass of water, looked at the wall, and felt the full weight of the evening settle through me. It was not triumph. It was not relief. It was quieter than that. The specific exhaustion that follows a very long time of carrying something you have finally set down. I thought about the dress. Midnight blue, knee-length, 6 weeks of lunch money, tried on 4 times, gone. I thought about what it had felt like to watch it burn and understand that the person who burned it had been making a calculation. That I was a variable in his life that had stopped being useful. That 7 years of someone's entire effort could be reduced to an inconvenience. That his response to loyalty was to burn it and drive away. But he had burned the wrong thing. He had burned a dress. He had left behind the woman. The Harrington Grand's ballroom was photographed extensively that night, and those photographs ran in 3 business publications and 1 national newspaper over the following week. In most of them, the chair at the head of the board table, empty for 7 years, appears occupied again by a woman in a midnight blue gown, with diamonds at her throat, looking at something outside the frame with the expression of a person who has made a decision and intends to keep it. Gavin's legal response to the divorce filing came 13 days later, through an attorney whose fees he had apparently borrowed, requesting mediation and a review of the financial disclosure motion. Margaret Holt's reply was 4 pages long, courteous, and thorough. I was told it made opposing counsel sit very still for a long moment before responding. The final settlement, 3 months later, gave Gavin Carter what 7 years of documented marital contribution entitled him to under Illinois law, minus the $34,700 in misappropriated funds, and minus the value of personal property destroyed, specifically 1 beaded midnight blue gown, which I had photographed in the backyard ashes the morning after the gala on Margaret Holt's advice. Document everything, she had said, with the tone of someone for whom that sentence is a complete philosophy of life. Gavin received enough to start over, not enough to continue the life he had designed. I was not cruel about it. I was precise. He moved to another city. I heard that secondhand and did not seek out more information, because knowing where he was had no relevance to where I was going, and where I was going was back. Back to the company my father built. Back to the work I had held at arm's length while conducting an experiment in ordinary life that taught me things I would not undo, even now. I know what a 12-hour shift feels like. I know what it means to watch a dollar in every direction, because there is only $1. I know what rough hands mean and what it costs to have them. I know those things in my body, not from a report, and I believe they make me a better steward of a company that employs 40,000 people than I would have been if I had stayed behind the board table at 23 and understood the world only from that altitude. I took the knowledge with me. I left the marriage behind. I kept the name, my name, the real one, the one I was born to, and I returned to the work that had always been mine to do. On a Thursday morning in March, about 4 months after the gala, I was sitting in my corner office on the 31st floor of Summit Tower. It was not a temporary arrangement. It was not the borrowed authority of a proxy. It was the actual office with my name on the door and the view of the lake my father had once described to me as the best view he had ever earned. My assistant told me there was a package waiting at the front desk. It was an unmarked box. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a midnight blue silk handkerchief with a small card written in Mr. Fairchild's handwriting. For the woman who already had everything she needed and was patient enough to wait for everyone else to find out. I held it in my hands for a moment. Then I placed it in my desk drawer, opened my laptop, and went to work.